Hi guys, today we're going to learn about circle graphs and how to interpret circle graphs and then how to take a survey and to create a circle graph out of it. So we're really looking at data. Okay, circle graph, it's also called a pie chart. It shows how a set of data is divided into parts out of 100%. So whenever I think about a circle graph, I always think about my pizza. So I always go back to the pizza. The whole thing is 100%. And then each sector or slice of it represents one part of the entire data set. Okay, so we're going to just go ahead and look at a circle graph. Here is a circle graph. And then we can interpret this circle graph. It's talking about cars. And I can look at which size car sold the most. Okay, well here it's going to be the biggest piece. So this is the biggest slice or sector of my circle, and that's mid-size. So mid-size cars sold the most. Approximately what percentage of cars sold were mid-size? Well, this here looks like almost 50%, slightly under, so I would say like 48% of the cars sold were mid-size, about 48%. Which size sold less, large cars or small cars? So sold less. So here's small cars, here's large cars. So it looks like small cars sold more, so that means large cars sold less. It's probably because they're more expensive. So here's another circle graph, and thankfully this one has a title. That's what we really want. I'm not sure why the last one didn't. This here, it says pet survey results. So they surveyed people, it says 30 people, about pet ownership. The circle graph shows the results of the survey. So 20% of the people only have dogs, 20% of the people surveyed only have cats, 10% have both dogs and cats, and then 50% have no pets. So we want to know how many people own dogs only. And it doesn't say percentage. If it did, I could clearly say 20% of the people own dogs. But it says how many people. So I want to know, like, do 5 people own dogs? Do 30 people own dogs? I want to know how many people. And I know that 30 people wouldn't be realistic because that would be 100%. So all of the people surveyed, 100 people, or 100%, would own dogs. Okay, because he only surveyed 30. So we want to look at it, and I would create a proportion. So remember, this is 20%, and percentages are out of 100. So I would write 20 over 100, and that's going to be equal to some number out of 30, right? So remember, it's always the part over the whole. So I'm going to write this. 20% is the part out of the whole 100%, and X is going to represent the part, some amount of people that own dogs out of the whole thing, which is 30, right? Leon surveyed 30 people. So it's part over whole. So 20 over 100 is part of the percentage equals X over 30. All right, from here we can solve our proportion. And remember, when we solve proportions, we cross multiply. So 20 times 30, I'll write that. 20 times 30. I just use a parenthesis. Remember, that means to multiply. It's a bad 20. 20 times 30. And we're cross multiplying. So that equals X times 100. Or 100X. All right. Now we can simplify this. So 20 times 30 is 600. Okay. And then X times 100, I'm just going to rewrite it so our number comes first, which is 100X. Okay. And I'm going to draw a line down the equal sign to solve this. So I want to get the X by itself. So that means I have to do the inverse operation. The opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 100. divided by 100. Whatever I do to one side, I have to do the other. This cancels, and I'm left with x, which is what I want. 600 divided by 100 is 6. So what does this mean? That means that 6 people own dogs only. Okay. We're just going to look at another question with the same circle graph and survey. It says, how many people own both dogs and cats? So dogs and cats is 10%. Well, I could just reason about this. If 20% was 6, 10% has to be 3. So I immediately know that 3 people own dogs and cats, but I can set up a proportion. So 10% is 10 over 100, right? 10%, percentages are out of 100, so that's why I put it over 100. So 10 over 100. And we're going to set up the other proportion. It's going to be some amount of people that own both dogs and cats, so that's x, that's my variable, out of 30 total people. Okay. And then I can solve my proportion. So I cross multiply and divide. So 10 times 30 equals x times 100, or 100x. Okay. Right, 10 times 30, and then 100 times x. So 10 times 30 is going to give me 300 on the left-hand side, if I'm going to simplify that, equals 100x is still on the right. And then I'm just going to solve for my variable, right? I want to get x by itself. I want to know how many people own both dogs and cats. And this is multiplication, 100 times x. So the inverse operation is division. So I'm going to divide both sides by 100. So I'm left with x, which is what I want. And then on the left-hand side, 300 divided by 100 is 3. 3 equals x. So that means that 3 people own dogs and cats. There's another way that you could solve this. 10% is 0.1, right, as a decimal, just divided by 100. So I could do 0.1 times 30, and that gives me 3 people. And if I go back, I can do the same thing for this problem. So 20% is 0.2 as a decimal, so I could have multiplied 30 by 0.2, which is 6 people. Okay, this is the fastest way of doing it. I like doing proportions because I think it makes a lot of sense to you, and it's also reviewing our proportion skills. Right, let's look at a different circle graph here. It says 50 students were asked which instrument they could play. The circle graph here shows the response. So 20% of the students can play the drum, 10% play the flute, 50% of students don't play any instrument, and 20% play the piano. The question is, how many students do not play an instrument? So no instrument. And again, it's not asking for the percentage. If it asked what percentage of students don't play an instrument, that's 50%. But this says how many students. Well, what's key here is how many students were surveyed. It says 50 students were surveyed. 50 students were asked this question. Okay, so again, we're going to create a proportion. So 50% don't play an instrument. So that's 50 over 100, right? 50%. And a lot of you can just use reasoning skill, 50% of 50. But we're going to write a proportion just so you have this example that you can use for any problem. So 50%, and we want to know how many students out of the total, right? Because it's part over whole, and the total students surveyed were 50. So this would be my proportion. So this is my percentage, and then part over whole. So some amount of students out of a total of 50 students that were surveyed. Again, we're going to cross multiply. So 50 times 50 and x times 100. 50 times 50 equals x times 100. Well, I'm going to write that as 100x, right? As great mathematicians, that's how we write it. So 50 times 50, we're going to simplify this side here. And we get 2500 equals 100x. Then we have to draw our line. We have to get rid of the 100 to isolate our variable and get x by itself. So we're going to divide both sides by 100 because that's the inverse operation of multiplication. Whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. Okay, 2500 divided by 100 is 25. And then we have x left here on this side. So this tells us that 25 students, and always include our units, 25 students do not play an instrument. Okay. And again, I could have reasoned 50% of 50 is 25, right? 50% is half. The same survey we're looking at, it's just a different question. It says 10 students said that they play the piano. How many play the flute? So if 10 students play the piano, so here is the piano, that's 20%. So 20% is equivalent to 10 students. So we can use reasoning about this, and we don't even have to create a proportion. It says 10 students play the piano. So 10 students is 20%. So how many students would be 10%? Well, that's half of 20, so it's going to be half of that. So it should be 5 students. Again, you can always use a proportion just to double check. This is just our reasoning skills that we used, but we can create a proportion. So 10%, we want to know how many play the flute. That's 10% over 100 equals x over 50. And it's 50 because 50 students were surveyed. Okay. We can cross multiply and divide. So 10 times 50 is going to be x times 100. It's going to be equal to. So 10 times 50 equals 100x. 10 times 50 is 500. And then if we divide both sides by 100, sorry, it's just taking a little bit of time to do this. Divide both sides by 100. This is going to cross cancel, and we're left with 5, right? 500 divided by 100 is 5. So 5 students play the flute. All right, so that's interpreting pie charts. Here, we're going to be given a survey. 120 students were asked the name of their favorite flavor ice cream. And here are the results. So 22 students said that they like strawberry, 17 said they like raspberry, 46 like chocolate chip, and 35 like vanilla. What we're going to do is we're going to create a pie chart out of this. So first, let's add up all the numbers and see what they equal. So 22 students plus 17 plus 46 plus 35 equals 120. So it should equal 120. And the reason it should is because they surveyed 120 students. Okay. There is an error here. This should not be 100. This should be out of 120. And to find the percentage, you do the part divided by the whole. So it's 22 because 22 students like strawberry divided by the whole, which is 120. And that's 18, it's actually 18.33 repeating percent. So we're just going to round it and say it's 18% because when we create the pie chart, it's just going to be a little bit easier. So to do raspberry, we're going to do the same thing. Okay, so it's 17 students liked raspberry.